What's up, Green Bay Packers fans? Welcome back, and as always, thank you for joining me. My name's Paul Brettel. Today we're going to discuss the Packers cornerback depth with the news about Jaire Alexander and his injury, and we're also going to talk about Josh Jacobs in the passing game. But first, hit like on the video, hit subscribe on the YouTube channel. I do greatly appreciate it. Find all my work over at ESPNlacrosse.com. Follow me on Twitter at Paul_Brettel. And for my Wisconsin sports fans out there, Packers, Brewers, Bucks, Badgers radio, download the 105.5 ESPN Lacrosse app for all your Wisconsin sports radio needs. So like I said, let's start with the Packers cornerback depth. According to the Athletics' Matt Schneidman, who spoke with Jaire Alexander, Alexander in that Jacksonville game, late in the game, suffered a PCL tear in his knee. Again, the Packers didn't necessarily view it as long-term, hence why they didn't place him on injured reserve. He did come back for the Chicago game on Sunday. Matt LaFleur said afterwards that the plan all along in that game was for him to be on a on a pitch count. However, I think 10 snaps in, Alexander knew the knee wasn't feeling right and re-aggravated that injury. So as far as what his return here moving forward, what that timeline looks like, that seems very much up in the air at this time. So we move on to the depth of that cornerback position. And since the draft, I mean, we go back to prior to then, I know me in talking about, all right, what are the Packers going to do, especially with having so many picks in the first 3 rounds of the draft. I very much thought that cornerback was going to be in play for them because the depth did seem to be a bit of a question mark, right? But before the draft, after the draft, during the summer, whether it's Matt LaFleur, Brain Gutekunst, even up until a couple weeks ago when speaking with us during the bye week, have continued to talk about how bullish they are on the Packers cornerback depth in that room, and it's going to be tested right now. And when we look at the trade deadline, again, there's a lot of factors in play. One, like I just mentioned, Packers have consistently said that they like the depth of that room, but at least from what Gutekunst said, doesn't sound like the trade environment at the deadline was necessarily conducive to making an addition. For one, not just cornerback, but generally speaking, Gutekunst said that there just wasn't a lot of players that seemed to be available for trade in the weeks leading up to the trade deadline. And when we look at who was traded once that deadline came and went, there were only 2 cornerbacks. One was Marshon Lattimore, who, I mean, of course, Marshon Lattimore ended up a Packer. That'd be a really fun conversation to have. But as I've talked about previously, I don't think that the recipe for that, for the Packers, was ever really in play. For one, we can look at how many draft picks Washington had to send to New Orleans to get Lattimore. That's just not the type of move that we see the Packers make. In addition to that, there's the contract. Well, he comes with a very minimal cap hit in 2024. His cap hit next year and the year after, I believe, are in the 20 plus, maybe even $25 million range. So again, it's a large cap hit, and it's a player who's dealt with injury. So the recipe wasn't necessarily there, I don't believe, for the Packers to go and get Marshon Lattimore. The only other cornerback who was traded was the Rams' Tre'Davious White. And this is just my gut feeling on it, because if we've heard of how highly the Packers have spoken about their cornerback depth. Perhaps they didn't view that as an upgrade over an Eric Stokes or Carrington Valentine. So again, not a trade that was made. So I think we can look back at that deadline and say, all right, we can understand why from that perspective. Again, limited options, how they view the cornerback position, right or wrong. Again, not saying that's going to end up being accurate. We're going to have to see how the rest of the season plays out, but that's how they feel. And that does obviously play a big factor in dictating and helping them navigate the decisions that they make at that cornerback position. So with who the Packers have now, this cornerback room, I think obviously your feelings about it depends whether or not Jaire Alexander is on the field, and not breaking any sort of news there. We all know that because of the caliber of player that he is. He's allowed only a 56% completion percentage this season. And when you have him on the field, again, a player of that caliber, someone that you trust. I mean, there's a trickle-down effect to that, to the safety position. In what McKinney does and what Evan Williams does, there's a bit more, I believe, freedom in how you utilize your safeties, because you're not necessarily as concerned about giving Jaire Alexander's side of the field help, right? You're confident in his ability to hold down the part of the field that he's on. So that's not necessarily a part of the field that your safety has to be concerned with, right? So there's more freedom, more flexibility to patrol the other part of the field, to provide help to the other cornerback, which has been Keyshawn Nixon in this case. So there's the individual talent and play and caliber level that Alexander brings just by being on the field. But I think in part too why you just feel better in general about the cornerback position when he's out there is because of the trickle down effect that it has to the rest of that secondary and how those other players are utilized and where the help goes. So again, we don't know when Jaire is going to be back. He did say that he does plan to be back this season. Again, not sure when. So now what? Now what do the Packers do at the cornerback position? I think it's fairly safe to say Keyshawn Nixon is going to be a part of that mix. And it looks like, based on the Bears game last week, again, one game, that Carrington Valentine is going to be that secondary option. He played 64 of the Packers' defensive snaps in that game. Eric Stokes played only 4. Now, on Thursday, Jeff Hafley was pretty non-committal in acknowledging that Valentine's going to be the guy moving forward. And there's a couple reasons for that. One, there could be the competitive advantage, however that exists, right, of not wanting to tip your hand about who your cornerbacks are going to be going into a game. But I also think looking at Hafley's defense, just how he's operated this season, and not only at the cornerback position, but other positions where the Packers have rotated or they've navigated injuries, it's very much matchup based. And I don't doubt for a second that if, based on the matchup, what the opponent does, the skill sets of Stokes versus Valentine, that if Hafley felt that there was a game, or at least certain situations, down and distances, scenarios, players within that game where he thought that Eric Stokes could hold his own better, I don't doubt that the Packers would do some mixing and matching, switching it up. So I think those are two factors that are in play in terms of why, again, Hafley, at least at this point, was non-committal about who's going to be starting in the secondary moving forward. But again, if I had to take a guess right now, I'm going to go with Carrington Valentine 1. Eric Stokes has had his ups and downs this season. Valentine, from the sounds of it, has been back, has been healthy, something that he's been, injury, something that he's been working throughout the season. And looking back at that Bears game, I mean, that's a massive discrepancy in snaps, 64-4 between Valentine and Stokes in that game. And, we can look at last season and how Valentine emerged, 7th round pick, but emerged as one of the starting guys at that cornerback position, and wonder where has he been this season. And Hafley acknowledged, and I think we've seen as well, a lot of it is just the injuries. He came into training camp competing with Eric Stokes for that starting boundary position opposite of Jaire, but that competition never really got going, right? He had a hamstring injury early on in training camp that sidelined him for several weeks. And like I said, that competition never really got off the ground. And then he plays only 9 snaps against the Eagles in week 1. Week 2 against the Indianapolis Colts, Valentine takes on a larger role. He's out there for 32 snaps, ends up with an ankle injury. Misses the next 2 games. He was on the injury report in some capacity, I believe, through week 7, maybe even week 8 of this season. So he's been navigating injuries and missing that time in training camp. I mean, that's where guys are ramping up. That's especially with a new defense, getting accustomed to your role, your responsibility within the scope of what Hafley's scheme is. And he's still a young player. I know he's not a rookie, but he's in year 2. So I think there's a lot of factors in play. I know a lot of it started with the injuries where Valentine was behind, playing catch up. And now these last couple weeks, he's been healthy. He's been a full participant in practice, getting those valuable reps. I think the Packers feel more comfortable in relying on him on Sundays. And I think, again, I keep going back to it, but I think that's what we saw this past week against Chicago. And Valentine brings a added physical presence to the secondary, to the cornerback position. Talked about it at his locker on Thursday. He likes that style of play, and he bulked up over the summer. He put on some weight, put on some muscle. He's someone that can help out in the run game, and again, just a physical presence at the cornerback position. Now, when we look at, again, that's where I think the direction that the Packers are going to go. Like I said earlier, there's a different level of confidence you probably have in the cornerback position, understandably so, as expected, when Jaire's out there versus when he's not. Because it's not as if this cornerback room, the secondary, has given up a ton of downfield throws, right? It's not like this defense is getting beat over the top consistently over and over and over again. But when you look at Valentine, you look at Stokes, even Nixon, the completion rate that they are giving up, I think most of those guys are in the 65, 70% range. And while Valentine and Nixon in particular are doing a good job of limiting the pass catchers, I think Nixon's allowing 9 or 10 yards a catch, Valentine's allowing 11, small sample size. But when you're giving up a catch 3 out of every 4 targets and the pass catcher's picking up 10 yards, let's call it, well, that's picking up first downs. That's moving the chains, right? So it's not necessarily that the huge explosive plays are there, but the plays on the ball, the pass breakups, the interceptions, minus McKinney and Jaire Alexander, aren't there for this team. And like I said, 9-10 yards in the grand scheme of the passing game, that's not a ton to give up from the cornerback's perspective on average. But if you're giving that up at a high completion rate, well, on second, third, and manageable downs, that's moving the chains. That's keeping the opposing offense on the field. And I think that's where the real question mark, I'll say, for this position group lies. Now, as we look forward to the rest of the season, talked about it on here before, but the pass rush can provide a lot of help for this Packers secondary. Picking up finding more consistency and getting after the quarterback will do obviously wonders for that position group. When you don't have to consistently be in coverage for 3-4 seconds at a time, massive advantage for the secondary, almost regardless of who you have out there on the field. Disrupts the timing, the rhythm of the throw. Obviously, you hope if the pressure leads to off-target throws, mistakes, pass breakup, interception opportunity. So the pass rush is going to have to be the Packers, or is going to have to be the secondary's best friend during the second half of the season, and especially during this time, again, when the team's going to be without Jaire Alexander. Last thing on this topic, 49ers coming to town on Sunday. I know they're dealing with their own injuries on both sides of the ball right now, but just 30,000-foot view of this 49ers team and the challenge that they present, the versatility. I mean, you have to be mindful defensively of where Kittle is, where Deebo Samuel is, where McCaffrey is lined up on the field, and communicating that one so everyone defensively is on the same page. And then also being really, and this is important every week, but it feels like an added emphasis, stressor on it when you're facing the 49ers, but being really, really assignment sound in what your responsibilities are, because not unlike what Green Bay does with the motions, the misdirections, Kyle Shanahan's going to throw a lot of eye candy at defenses, and trying to decipher on the fly what's coming, obviously a very, very difficult task. So what do you have to do in that situation? You go back to your rules as a defender. You go back to what your fundamental assignment responsibility is on that play, and you got to stick to that. And you have to trust, obviously, that the other 10 guys around you are going to do the same. And then when operating as a complete unit in that regard, that you're able to handle, again, whatever the 49ers might throw at you. Because I asked Javon Bullard about this, and he said, against this team in particular, I mean, one step, half step, in the wrong direction, and they can go 75 yards on you for the end zone. So there is that big play potential. So secondary defense as a whole is going to be tested this week against this 49ers offense. And again, Packers have been really, really bullish about their cornerback depth. Right or wrong, we're going to find out if that was the right feeling, the right decision from Brain Gutekunst. Not just, again, at the trade deadline, but going back to the draft and all that time in between. All right, on to the last topic for today, and that's Josh Jacobs in the passing game. And the reason why I wanted to touch on this is because specifically this Sunday against this 49ers defense, I think that his ability to impact the game in that regard can be a really big aspect, is going to be a really important aspect, I should say, for this Packers offense. And going back to April or March when free agency takes place and the Packers signed Josh Jacobs, obviously we know what his resume is as a ball carrier. We've seen this season just how impressive he is in that regard. But the Packers were also at that time really excited about what he brings to the passing game as well. And over the summer, is you have off-season programs, is you have the training camp practices, and Jason Vrabel, the Packers passing game coordinator, gets to see Jacobs in action in the passing game. There's a couple aspects of it that he was really, really impressed by. Vrabel talked about Josh Jacobs' hands. Very reliable catcher, very natural pass catcher. And the other component of it was his route running ability. I mean, Vrabel said that he thinks Jacobs can run a variety of routes within a route tree. And those are two elements that we've started to see especially as the season's progressed, on display from Josh Jacobs. He's caught 23 of 27 passes on the season, averaging over 8 yards per catch from the running back position, averaged over 14 yards per catch this past Sunday against the Chicago Bears. And one of the reasons he's so effective, one, again, reliable pass catcher, right? You can ask him to do a variety of things in the passing game because of his ability as a route runner. This isn't just leak out of the backfield, dump it off to him and let him go, although we do see that. But it gives Matt LaFleur more flexibility in terms of how he gets Josh Jacobs involved in the passing game. But one of the big reasons he's so successful as a pass catcher is because in the passing game, you're getting him the ball in space. You're getting him the ball with 5-6 yards of space around him to operate. And as we've seen as a ball carrier, as we've seen in the passing game, Josh Jacobs is really, really good when working and operating from space. Among all running backs coming into Week 12, he ranks 10th in average yards after the catch in the passing game. Just as a ball carrier in general this season, he ranks 5th in the average yards after contact. So again, very difficult to bring down. He's generated the 7th most missed tackles in football. So when you're getting Jacobs the ball in the passing game, you're giving him almost a head start in an area that he's already really skilled at, right? The ability to make defenders miss. And it feels like when you get him the ball, at a minimum, you're going to move the chains. It feels like you're going to, 5, 6, 7 yards, you're going to keep the chains moving. Obviously an important component. But as we saw against the Bears too, and because of that ability to make defenders miss, he can pick up chunk runs and get a 23-yard gain against Chicago. As I mentioned, he averaged 14 yards on his 4 receptions against the Bears. So again, that just opens up, as Matt LaFleur said on Thursday, just opens up a whole nother dimension for this Packers offense, a whole nother facet that defenses now have to be mindful of when defending this Packers team. And that's, again, in addition to all the options that they already have at receiver in the passing game, Tucker Kraft at the tight end position, all of that. So it's just an added stressor for defenses. So that's why Jacobs has been so impactful. That's one of the reasons why the Packers wanted to bring him in as a free agent. So Sunday's game, specifically against the 49ers, why do I think that this element can be so important? 3 main reasons behind that. One, they're going up against the Niners defense, and I know Nick Bosa's status for Sunday's game is up in the air at this time, but just generally speaking, this is a Niners defense that ranks 9th in yards per carry allowed this season. And while certainly you can't ever forget about the run game, what you do not want to do against this Niners defense is become one-dimensional. You not want to become predictable and pass heavy. You want to still strike that balance. So this isn't to say you can't forget about the run game, but if picking up yards on the ground is difficult, the running back in the passing game can at times work sort of as a pseudo run game, right? Opportunity to get the ball out of your hands quickly, as we talked about the value of getting Josh Jacobs the ball in space and letting him pick up yards in that capacity, again, to stay ahead of the sticks, to pick up first downs, and out of those dangerous long down and distance situations. Now, the other reason why I think Jacobs can provide a ton of value in the passing game, the pass rush. And again, this is a very different 49ers pass rush when Bosa's out there versus when he's not. And again, as of me recording this right now, I do not know if he's going to be available on Sunday. But again, pass rush is getting after the quarterback. Running back can be a quarterback's best friend. Dump it off, get the ball out of your hands quickly, and again, pick up some sort of yardage. Lastly, Niners secondary. They're allowing 6.6 yards per pass attempt this season. That's the 6th best average by a defense in football. It's been tough to pick up chunk plays against this 49ers team. So again, if there isn't any options downfield in the passing game, dump it off. This is also a way to get the running back involved where there's a positive trickle-down effect to, again, how the defense defends you. Alluded to this a minute ago. This adds another dimension to the offense. So one, if the defense has to be worried about the running back in the passing game, Well, there's more space that they now have to cover. There's more field that they have to be aware of, and that can spread a defense out, can create more spacing, can create more one-on-one opportunities for the receivers or tight end in the Packers passing game. The other aspect of it is if you're starting to pick up some chunk plays on those dump offs or passing plays to Josh Jacobs, all of a sudden the secondary can start to creep up a little bit. The linebackers can start to creep up a little bit. And again, could open up an opportunity downfield for the offense to take advantage of. Now, having said that, 49ers have, I think, the ultimate eraser on the defensive side of the ball, and Fred Warner at the linebacker position, who is certainly going to make getting the ball to Jacobs in this capacity more challenging. But again, I think for the reasons mentioned, that Jacobs' ability as a pass catcher can be really, really important to Sunday's game and just the offense as a whole, staying ahead of the sticks, finding a rhythm, picking up first downs. And like I said, potentially there's a positive trickle-down effect of that, opening up other opportunities in the passing game as well. If you made it this far in the video, I appreciate you tuning in. Might as well hit like, hit subscribe on the YouTube channel. I greatly appreciate it. You can follow me on Twitter at Paul_Brettel. And like I said at the beginning, you can find all my work over at ESPNlacrosse.com. Multiple articles up per day. Appreciate you tuning in. Take care, everyone.